Okay, good morning once again. This is Joe Winberg, Bluebird Semaphore. And of course, I've just finished doing a piano video. This is like September 27th, 2023. So you can match those two videos. This one taken after that one. And this is a talking video. This will probably be world history for ordinary people. Probably 6B, it could be 7B. I don't think that's all that important. But I'd like to keep some kind of track. Now, the way I was working it, slight changes are taking place, as you would imagine, because I think 3 or 4 years have transpired since I've been doing this. And I find myself spending more and more time looking at YouTube documentaries. And that time is being taken, for the most part, from the time I used to spend reading. And then after reading for a while, I'd do a videotape and try to do a recap on that stuff. And by the way, what you're seeing in the background here, this is like the latest painting, that one. That's the latest. And then there's one over here, which I think is the next latest, and this one is the next latest. Just thought I'd mention that. Sometime, maybe when I have one or two more and they're totally dry, I'll put them up for your inspection. Now, the reason why I'm talking again today, I could have waited another few days, really is hardly of any consequence. But I just like to hear myself talk, so what the heck, you get in front of this thing and chit-chat, hopefully somebody's listening. Now, I had been talking about John Adams, and I'm going to continue talking about that. The other thing, today's agenda is somebody put a book in my hand on Magellan. Now, for some reason, I think all these books on explorers and the age of discovery and so on are being what's the right word? They're being promoted for some reason. I think that the writing world, the book publishing world, although from what I'm also getting is that like nobody's reading books anymore, so who knows what that's all about. But somebody put a book in my hand on Magellan. That's the title, Magellan. And I think that book might already be 10 or more years old. It seems that everybody's getting their information from the so-called web, which is, before I start to talk about John Adams and Magellan, let me talk about what I just said. But even before that, I just want to say that two things on the YouTube I've seen recently. And the one was an interview, Dick Cavett interview with John Lennon and Yoki, whatever her last name is. I can't think of it right now. But first of all, I always loved Dick Cavett. Just astute, coming to me, an astute individual who knows stuff, and he presents it in a intelligent fashion. Now, I know he's not squeaky clean and always that persona. From what I understand behind the scenes, he could be quite funny, quite hilarious, maybe even somewhat of a rapscallion. I don't know that for sure. But he was giving the interviews, and I had seen a few others on YouTube that he interviewed. But this one really struck me as worth watching because, beyond a shadow of a doubt, John Lennon is definitely worth watching. Very great sense of humor, very uh, knowledgeable, talented. Obviously, the singing, we know that, but lots of other things. And Yoki Yomo is also a very talented young lady. We knew that. Although this interview probably went back, I don't know, what, 1980? No, he was 30 years old, John Lennon at the time. So let's say this interview was, I don't know, somewhere in the 70s, maybe 1980. I don't know. But just really worth watching. And Cavett was a wonderful, the expression for that, but he was just perfect for these two because both of them, John and Yoko, they were performing. That's what they were doing. They were on stage, and they probably thought of themselves as always being on stage. If they were somewhere and there were other people, the other people were, for that period of time, interested in them. That's it. Nobody else existed on a planet for that period of time but those two. And, rightly so. I mean, their talent comes through. They're not like some of these people who really have very little talent, but the media industry pushes and pushes, and of course, that's all people know. They know what people put in front of them, and they couldn't judge talent from a cord of wood. Thank you, Tip O'Neill, for that little saying. I think I mentioned that once before. So that was one, and another documentary that I was very glad to come across. I don't know, there's literally, I'm watching most of these on TV, and you pick them from a long listing, and the titles, sometimes the titles mean what's really in the documentary. Sometimes they're far off the mark. So I usually have to go in and start to listen, see if this is really what I thought it was. So there was one that came up, and the person who's going to do speak during this documentary was somebody named Stephen Schwartz, and he has been being an intellectual for some way back in the late '60s till whenever this documentary was made, which is probably made 10 or more years ago. But be that as it may, it was about something that's seemingly becoming more and more popular to talk about, something about remote viewing sessions and remote perception viewing. I know why I wanted to read it, because the title on the listing said this was going to be about Edgar Cayce. And this guy, Stephen Schwartz, is a very knowledgeable person when it comes to Edgar Cayce. Now, Stephen Schwartz has a lot more knowledge in his bag of tricks, no doubt about that. A very erudite guy, and it seems like he's half the type he's apologizing to his audience for knowing so much. But hey, what are you going to do? You study for 40 years, you're going to know something. And but this remote access business I found extremely interesting, because basically what it's saying is that, we are all conscious. We're conscious of what we think our world is. That's what we think that everybody is more or less seeing the same thing, and everybody more or less has the same experience when it comes to consciousness. Now, you and I, perhaps, and many others, and a few others that maybe that are listening to this, they've all heard of Carl Jung, and Joseph Campbell, and many others who talked about consciousness and the collective unconscious. And but and certainly I read about that years ago, and that's all I put into it was that the collective consciousness is nothing more than the consciousness we have times 50 gazillion times, and somehow they're all interacting, and I put it to rest. But years ago, and I gotta say, 40 years ago at least, when I was getting more and more used to listening to classical music, they would play Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And I was just so struck about how divine that music was. And I would tell people, that guy Vivaldi, he had access to the divine world, whatever that was. I have no idea. But he was going straight to the source to get that music because it was divine. And he's not the only one. When it comes to music, the classical composers, many of them touch base, I feel. Now, I have no proof for this. Who could have any proof of this? But they touch base with what was going on in the infinite and in the universe. They touch base with it. So, and this is why Stephen Schwartz's discussion in his documentary was of such interest to me, because I started to think that, okay, so here's this this composer, let's not start exaggerating, but this composer, and somehow he has the genetics that he can, not unlike Edgar Cayce, to somehow get himself in the right frame of mind that now he's open to what's out there in the universe for musical interpretations. And he gets out there, he locks in, he writes his composition, and he's wonderful. Remote access, And like I said, I can't prove this stuff. Nobody can prove it, But what he also says, Stephen Schwartz, is that they've done science, what they call science, to look in, and they looked into this, and they found that if 10% of a population is thinking something, he says, then the whole population will be buying into whatever it is that the 10% is thinking about. And how does that apply to our world today? I don't even have to tell you the answer. You all know it. It's the cell phones. Way more than 10% of the population has bought into the concept of social media. Way more. And now that is consciousness. Consciousness is social media. There's no two ways about it. If the science that Stephen Schwartz is talking about is true, and not only true, but good science, with all the checks and balances, with all the data collecting, blah, blah, blah. If that's it, then, hey, listen, social media is consciousness. There's no two ways about it. Now, I, for one, obviously, has always been a major detractor of social media. Major. Can't stand it. But why was I a major detractor? Because this huge population that's creating this consciousness had very little to do with getting the ball rolling, okay? Some few, jugheads out there in California put this all together, and then everybody else bought into it, okay? And then when they got past their 10%, still done. Here we go, we got a new world. Now, that's why I didn't like it, because people didn't have the chance to be brought into a room, explain the pluses and the minuses of this sort of consciousness, and then have a chance to say they want it or they don't want it. It was forced down everybody's throat. And that's why I don't like it. Because I don't like when that happens. I don't like it when anybody does that. To me, it's always wrong. And it's wrong right now. But you can't fight it. Because this is, and once again, I don't know if it was Steve Schwartz or somebody was talking about, physics and the underlying assumptions that come along with physics. The premise is that this idea of the 10% and then that becomes consciousness gels well with the current understanding of physics, quantum mechanics, and all that business. So I'm not saying I'm for it, but I can't be against it either because this is like breathing air. This is like drinking water. This is it. Now, I'll be all right because what the heck, I've lived a life that wasn't a collective consciousness. I've lived that life. I know what it is. I kind of like it. I kind of like calling my own shots. But the majority of the world now knows only the consciousness of social media. That's all they know, and they're buying into it. So, Pater Noster, peace to you, and do whatever you want. I don't have a dog in a fight. That's all I'll say. Now, the other thing we talked about, so those were the two things from YouTube. And so going to John Adams now. So I said that John Adams, when I was reading the book, and I think the book was by somebody, David McCulloch, simply called John Adams. And I said, well, when I'm reading in the beginning, it says, maybe this guy's a good guy. We'll see. But, what I'm finding out is that, unlike, similar to what ancient Chinese dynasties forced their picked historians to write when there was a regime change. They always brought in picked, selected historians and said, okay, you're going to write a new history and this is going to be the stuff you're going to put in it. You're going to say, we're great, we did this, we did that. That's what I want you to do. So, once again, me being who I am, I said, how does this apply to contemporary times? Because that way of writing history was the way they did it and still do it in China. Regime change, no historians, write no history. Revisionist stuff, you've heard that for many years. Revisionists. Make it look good for us. So, I didn't claim that that's what the great historians were or are doing. But I said, I had to keep my mind open that this could be a possibility. So, here we are writing about one of the preeminent early Americans, John Adams. And within less than 300 pages, it's clear that John Adams is one of the early American elites. Clear. That's the crowd he came from. And that's a very small number of the American population at the time. Small number, elite. He and many like him, they went to Harvard, lifelong friendships established. They worked together in political, commercial, religious life, commerce. They worked together because they got their friendships established in the elite schools. This is what goes on and has been going on in England for very, very long time. And what surprises me is that in the revolutionary times, everybody was saying what a bad place and bad people the British are, yet when they made this country, they made it, like a replica of Britain. And I'll tell you, from my reading so far, I kind of prefer the English political system to ours. They both claim to be democracies, but I like the British model a little better. I don't know, maybe it's just a little more homey, because you got the House of Commons and the way they represent the people and so on. I don't know, but it really doesn't matter that much. But it's very similar, and yet, these guys making this country, oh, England's terrible, they're bad. Quite frankly, reading what I read about this is that I kind of feel that England said, hey, you know what? It's not worth it. What are we wasting our money, our men, our resources, trying to make them a permanent colony? It's not worth it. We have so many better places. We have India. We have places throughout the Indochina We have the Caribbean. We don't need this colony. All this colony has is some tobacco and maybe a little cotton. We don't need them. So I think they kind of just nonchalantly lost that war. That's what I think. No, it's just an opinion. and my opinions are, in my estimation, backed up with a lifetime of reading. What can I say? I can't say I didn't read, I did. And I can't say I didn't get opinions, I did. Because if you read and you don't get opinions, you're wasting your time. Close the books, go down to the bar and have a drink. You're much better off. You're much better off. But anyway, so John is starting to not be the perfect individual that I thought he was going to be. And I don't want to start denigrating him, but I don't believe he's who the author started to make him out to be. Right now, the author is making John out to be impeccable, a man of total integrity, never did a bad thing in his life. Now, what I would say is that there are elements starting to appear in this narrative that are starting to change my mind about it. I'm not sure, but there are elements about it. And the same thing with his wife, who he goes on and on and on. This is the author about how strong she was, how persevering while her husband was away for years. What's she doing? She's back home buying 1,000 acres of land up in Vermont. Her husband's out gallivanting throughout Europe, mostly France. She's sending him shopping lists of goods to buy for her little retail outlet on the side, pins and gloves and all these little articles that she could sell to the ladies. That's what Abigail's doing. So, and, nobody picks up on this. It's in the book. You read it, and then I form an opinion. I think that that's taken advantage of a free ticket to Europe by one of the guys in the Continental Congress, namely John Adams. They send him there, and she's using it as their personal import business. I mean, what is this? Is this current contemporary politics? What's going on? These guys are supposed to be squeaky clean. Comes to find out they weren't. And the author, David, he does bring up examples of folks sent over there or other folks who had influence in the Continental Congress who weren't squeaky clean. But like I said, they were the elite. They were that little fractional percentage at the top of the social structure. And you had two types, in my estimation. You had the northern elites and you had the southern elites. What differentiated them primarily was the northern elites, they had indentured servants to do all their work, and in the south they had slaves to do all their work. And then they had time to do these little trips to France or whatever else they did. And if you didn't know it, and maybe you get your hands on it, there's a book called Tidewater, I believe, or the history of the Tidewater. The Tidewater is that area around the Potomac and Virginia, Maryland, Chesapeake Bay. So early on, the wealthy and the well-connected were getting these large grants of land by the British establishment, would give their pals large grants of land over there in the Tidewater region. And those people, more or less, came over as families, and they would set up these large tracts of lands as plantations. They would get the houses built. They would ride off to Europe for furniture. They would furnish these places. Mansions, beautiful. Oh, so well decorated. They would do all of that, okay, establish it, then it was back to Europe. Because that was the type of existence those people were used to, and that's what they wanted. Now, from that, you can, and the descendants of all those plantations, that's where you get another or more of the same early elites in this country. You know, people who run the show. It's a bad word. You can't say elites anymore. You know, that's bad, bad, bad. You're setting up classes. No, that's bad, bad, bad. Doesn't matter that it's reality. You know, go to Kensington, Philadelphia, and tell me what the score really is. And I'm not going to buy, well, these people have it coming to them. No, nobody has it coming to them. You know, it happens because we neglected to create a great society. We neglected. We built a society for commerce. That's what we did. You know, and then they're going to say, oh, but you don't have commerce, you can't have anything, blah, 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 blah. But I could tell you, extracted from books, that the reason, and the only reason, the elite wanted independence from Britain was to promote commerce. That's it. Nothing else. They weren't trying to create a more just world or, you know, protect anything, protect nothing. They did it for commerce. That's what they did. And I will never back off of that. That's what they did. So that's the story of John. And, you know, I got to finish reading it. Listen, nobody's all bad and nobody's all good, you know, but I start to pick this out. And also, John, when he went over there to France, he went over there now 2 times. And he was always staying with Benjamin Franklin. Okay? Always. So, what is Benjamin Franklin known for? More than the kite flying experience. He's known for being the biggest womanizer on the continent, and probably back home in and around Philadelphia or anywhere he went. He's the biggest womanizer on the planet. So what happens? You send this guy, young man, in his early 40s, over there. He's basically living with Ben, Ben is basically showing him the ropes over there. What do you think? Maybe a little hanky-panky? Who knows? But what I do know is that the man who's supposedly so in love with his wife, after being in France for about 9 months the first time, he comes back, and in his letters is oh, how much I miss you, oh, I can't wait to get back, blah, 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 blah. Long story short, he's here for 3 weeks or 3 months, maybe 3 months. And the Continental Congress says, oh, you got to go back. We want you to be the plenipotentiary and make all the decisions with the British and the French. You're going to be our guy. 3 months. He doesn't even stop to talk about it with Abigail. He just goes. What was he rushing back to France for? Okay? I read into this stuff. I read into it. And it doesn't make it true. It's just I read it. I make an opinion. And that's all it is. It's an opinion. But he rushed back pretty quickly for a Puritan, a New England elite Puritan who was so in love with his wife, you know, and she too, she had a little liaison going on with some dude named Lowell. They were pen pals. He was in the Continental Congress, and he was a friend of John Adams. But you know, the Loneleys must have gotten to her, and the two of them became fast pen pals. So, in the amount of time she was separated from him, I mean, we're talking at least a couple of years, and I'm not through with the book yet. I think one of the trips over there, she went with him. Also, in the second trip, he brought his second son. So the two sons were there, which is pretty interesting. The first son, John Quincy Adams, who I believe that he's somebody important in the lineage of American elected officials. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to say it because I'm not positive. But yeah. And so to me, there was more there than meets the eye. Now let's get off John and all that stuff in America. Let's turn our attention to Magellan. There's a sorry dude. I'm telling you, Magellan never got his fair shakes. Not really. He was, and God forbid this happens to anybody, he was a nobleman, a Portuguese nobleman, but of lower rank. He came from something like the fourth order down of nobles. And you don't get anything at the court. You're the fourth noble down. You get nothing. And all you do is you get some crumbs, you beat your head out trying to get a position that would put you in position to make some money and earn your keep, so to speak. But he's pretty resourceful. He did have good education. I think his mother saw to that. And he has numerous experiences, always with either military fight experience or sea, maritime adventures. He had lots of them, but never a commanding figure, never the man in charge, always somebody a little slightly down below, but he didn't idle and he didn't bemoan his fate. He studied, he learned the scientific instruments needed to be a mariner, which is no small task. He did that. He knew the world as it stood at the time. Okay? And I haven't got to it yet. I do know the rest of the story because, those kind of guys I've always read about. But this book was put in my hands, so I felt I better read it. And I'm really glad I did because already, before he even sets out on his voyage of exploration, he had been in the service of Portugal, and he was coming into the area, the desirable area of the Far East, before he made his well-known, famous trip in the other direction to circumnavigate the globe. But he was working as an individual with various responsibilities on ships and on land over there in India, the Malabar coast, and Cochin and Goa and all these places, Arabs. Basically, the Portuguese and the Arabs were splitting that whole area up. A little bit Malay, but that was pretty much it. Now, I say this because he was already aware of where the Spice Islands were. Now, why is that important? Because I make it important. It's important because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where the Spice Islands were. And if you know where they are, they're more mixed in with a bunch of islands, in that Indonesian world, where Borneo's the big guy in the, whatever you want to call it, he's the big guy, and it's Borneo, but there are literally, I want to say, thousands of small islands all over the place. And the Spice Islands is one of them. And one of those islands is the island that they really wanted to find. Why? Because on that particular island, it's the only place in the world that you could grow cloves. And that was a highly desirable spice. They also got nutmeg from that island, and they got pepper from India, various types of pepper. And this was big bucks. I think I read that one of those spices, which I think it was the pepper, but they would, well, it was certain weight of pepper that you would get, but not a lot. Something like 500, whatever it is they used then, reals, but it was quite a lot of money. So everybody was going after spices. And when I say everybody, all these merchants, commerce, people of commerce, and the Silk Road, which started 300 years before what we're talking about, and a lot earlier than that. But I always focus on Marcus Polo. So they were doing spices. There's a little side thing along with the silk, and gold was there. So he knew where that island was, and that would be a highly guarded secret. You didn't want to let the rest of the world know, but he knew. So then he goes back to Portugal, and events led to the fact that the particular monarch at the time was probably trying to hedge his bet, finally bought into the idea of getting to the Spice Islands by traveling west across the Pacific, rather than what they were doing, going south in the Atlantic, underneath Africa, through the Arabian Sea, into the Indian Ocean, and into Indonesia. Actually, they probably went more up and then down the Malacca Straits and right into Indonesia, which was quite a distance. I mean, there was a ton of miles between the Malacca Straits, which ends in and around Singapore. And then you go where the Spice Islands are, and that's all the way just off the western tip of New Guinea. Now, I've given you enough information. You could go find it yourself. But today, you just probably type in Spice Island and it'll tell you everything you want to know. When I was learning this stuff, I had to do it the hard way. I had to learn something. Don't take me as being smug, or something like that. But I'm so glad, because now that I know where, I know the background of how they were allowed to trade with the inhabitants of the Spice Island, which once again, they were Arabs and Malays who were controlling it. But the Portuguese, how that all came about, I know that. Not just knowing where it was, but knowing how that all came about. I think that my quest is now ended. The only thing left to do is to learn how to play the piano. When I do that, maybe paint a little better. But when I learned, once I found out the whys and the hows of the Spice Islands, I became golden, so to speak. But I'll never forget. I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, I went down to the little Italian market in Philadelphia, and still open at the time was a store that was involved in selling spices in bulk, never in large bulks because it's very expensive. But the store, you walked in there, you thought you were back in the 18th century. Just old looking, nothing chrome, nothing flashy, knowledgeable people in the store to help you. It was so wonderful. I thought, oh my God, look at what I got here, And then what happened? Within a year, it was closed. And but there was another one across the street down there in the Italian market, but it didn't have that historical look. It was good. The people were good. Probably still there. So I think I'll wrap it up on that note. It's good talking to you. We talked about John Adams. We talked about Stephen Schwartz and he calls it various things: non-local consciousness, remote viewing sessions. Edgar, what was his name? Edgar Casey. Yeah, and you can find all this stuff on YouTube. Attention, focus, awareness. You can find it all on YouTube. What you got to do with YouTube is you got to cull. You got to cull. You know, and then you'll find some stuff. And you have to watch it because now with all the razzle dazzle they can do with the videos, you're getting more razzle dazzle and very much less true information. But the razzle dazzle is what the people are looking for, and that's the consciousness. That's what they want. They vote with their little fingers. Where they go, that's a vote. Okay? And they build a new consciousness. So you, as somebody who still wants to learn the true story, you have to be careful when you're in YouTube. We're in YouTube right now, aren't we? I think we are. But just be, and I'm not denigrating YouTube. I think that, you know, they've put the information out there. It's just for people to cull. And that's been the same case with books. You go to the libraries, what do you see? What do you see on the shelves? A stack of garbage. That's what you see. You got 4 aisles filled with World War II books. There's 3 of them in there worth reading. So, does it seem like I have a negative attitude? You're darn tootin' it does. Listen, finish the day, have a wonderful time, and that's all I'll say. I have to hit close now. See, I'm voting with my finger. I'm voting to shut this guy up.